This is a lesson on the site of Teotihuacan with specific reference to their large-scale manufacture and trade of ceramics and stone masks. These two types of items are in the same presentation here because stylistically they're quite similar in the way that they depict the human face. So let's get started. This particular first mask is one of the best preserved that's been recovered from the site. The site of Teotihuacan has been investigated archaeologically for over 100 years and a massive amount of excavation and mapping. So we have a tremendous amount of artifacts. In this particular case, the stone mask has the basic shape that's always part of the presentation of the human face at this particular site, but the mosaic of turquoise and red shell is still glued to the face. We can see the lozenge-shaped eyes, the slightly opened mouth, and the really incredible attention to detail of the placement of the mosaics. As you move on to the next image here, we see a very, very similar mask with a similar ornament clipped to the nose and over the mouth. This is the butterfly mouth mask. We see this in murals as well, figurines, masks. In this particular cultural zone, the butterfly probably has something to do with transformation and movement into the next reality, perhaps even in regards to death. This one is ceramic and very, very similar in shape to the first. Now, those faces appear in a number of other types of artifacts or materials that were commonly used. And as we move on to these lidded incensarios or incense burners, you can see that there are central figures here that have the same type of shape to the face, frequently with the butterfly mouth mask, but each one of these is going to be different. The bottom is kind of shaped like a modern flower pot, and it is where the probably charcoal was to heat the so-called incense. In this case, naturally, it is actually plant sap from certain specific types of plants. The back of these is very, very plain, but the front is very elaborate. Each one is different, and that is because we do believe that the pieces were made by stamps, kind of like making a cookie cutter, and then people purchased them and assembled them at home within their apartment complex for whatever the specific use, ritual, or event. As we look at an image here of the back, you can see that this is just got a chimney that comes off the back and that there are several flat pieces that allow the ornaments in the front to be applied. These can be very, very fancy and frequently have paint. The Teotihuacan color symbolism for ceramics is the same as for their murals. Red and tones of red dominate, but we also see a frequent use of white and green. Black is sometimes there for an accent color, but red, white, and green at Teotihuacan. In this particular case, we see a high-ranking warrior-type figure holding a pair of shields, a huge amount of feathers. None of these long types of feathers comes from any birds that are local to the Central Highlands here, so these would all have to be the product of importation from much, much further south in forested settings. We also see on this particular lid a large amount of small glued-on images of agricultural produce. The incensarios are not always as fancy as each, but we see also very, very frequently small images of mirrors and of bird-type faces, shields going across the front, and again, red, yellow, and green. The face inside that you can see in some of these that are a little bit more open is why they're called theaters, with all the ornaments around the edges, like on a modern theater, and then the face or the image in the back. Occasionally they are much more smoothly done, but again, we see on this one a series of mirrors across the front, some really, really large tassels, and a heavily dressed or ornamented figure with the so-called butterfly mouth mask, which some of you are noticing already is very, very similar to the talud tablero architectural style that we see on all ritual buildings at the site of Teotihuacan. All right, next up are small clay figurines. There are several really distinctive types of figurines that we find in abundance at Teotihuacan, and as you'll be able to see as we move through, again, that very similar shape of face, the lack of any specific facial expression, and the color palette of primarily red and white on these, but sometimes yellow. Not so much green with the figures, but perhaps it hasn't preserved, is going to be common. They are frequently really tiny, as you could see at that very first figurine that I'm holding up. That is a very nice copy that you can sometimes purchase from local vendors. They frequently find the originals or photos or molds, and they're able to really make fantastic items for the public. Many of these figures are whistles, and in this couple of images here, we see a coyote figure, again, very, very small, but very fancy. And as you turn it around the back, you can see that instead of a tail, it's the pipe end for a whistle. When you blow on it, it makes a nice little high-pitched noise. Whether these things are for fun, personal items, toys, really very difficult to tell. However, it doesn't seem like many of them were toys from the context and the places that we find them. Moving on, there are, just like in every site, a tremendous amount of broken figures that we find in and around household remains, garbage types of pits, and other places. Figurines may have been purposely broken in order to release their soul force. Remember, in an animistic world, things that you make and then invigorate with rituals then are alive. But again, you can release that force back into the system by breaking them, and we frequently see that that is the case. Probably the most charming of the inventory are the small figures that are wearing costumes. We really don't believe that this is how people dressed on the day-to-day, but in this particular scene of three, you can see three females wearing the shoulder cape, sometimes very similar to our modern-day huipil type garment, with a central opening, no form fitting around the arms or so forth, but these very, very large, flat, probably paper, but perhaps painted leather headdresses. Again, no way to really tell if these were worn for one's particular activity or ritual, or whether this was constant ritual or processional wear, but very, very charming. Teotihuacan also produced some extremely unique types of larger figurines. And one that we really don't have any things similar from any of their neighboring linguistic groups or cultural groups are puppets. They're called puppets when they do have the movable arms and legs. Here you can see that they went ahead and made the head very fancy. The typical face, no difference between males and females. Huge earplugs and very, very fancy headwear on there, but the rest of the body is not dressed. We assume that this is because it did have some sort of costume that is no longer present. Doesn't really matter whether they're AD1 or AD600, they're very, very similar, flexible arms and legs, so we assume that they could be posed or positioned. Another unique type of figure, as you can see here with the little photo here with some text, are called host figures. These actually have a removable piece on the chest, or the whole front of the figure comes off. These, at least all that I've ever seen, are seated. When you remove that chest piece, if they have not been pilfered by someone that's looted them or stolen them, and remove the interior pieces, they have a lot of little pieces on the inside. Now, those little pieces, again, this is not a cultural zone where they left any written inscriptions that can be interpreted. So again, animistic society, this concept of having individuals inside of another individual, perhaps that is something that's kind of a straight line association, maybe not. At any rate, there are quite a few of these that are known, and some of them have really large numbers of very, very tiny figures inside, always with very elaborate ritual outfits on, big headdresses of imported bird feathers, or the very, very fancy ear ornaments and so forth. Wrapping up here, we move on to the larger solid one-piece stone masks. These masks are made in a number of different stones: alabaster, some of the heavier volcanic stones, and onyx are frequently represented. They are nearly life-sized. However, the shape of the face is the same and stays the same for a number of centuries. Many do have holes in either the forehead or along the sides for earrings, ear flares, or probably to attach them to something else. They also frequently show some of the indentations or carving that would lead us to believe that they had inlay, like the original one we saw with the turquoise and shell, or mouth masks. It does appear with many that they originally had inlay for eyes and for the teeth as well. Whether these went in with burials or on bundles of other items or on ritual figures, not 100% clear, and perhaps for most things or for all of them. But they are very definitely stylistically Teotihuacan, as you can tell at this point in the presentation. The last items we're looking at here are the fancier ceramics. These ceramics have been found traded away as far as the southern Maya lowlands, and they're very easy to see that it's not just a technique of making a clay container and then putting stucco on the outside and painting it, but that the designs on the exterior are clearly showing Teotihuacan images. Their colors, patterns, red and green with some white and black. Individuals dressed exactly the same way as we see them in procession on murals. The use of scrolls coming out of the mouth for sound rather than hieroglyphs, and just generally the way that artists are using or making these ceramics. A very typical shape is just a plain straight-sided cylinder with 3 flat tripod feet. These are sometimes pierced with a little bit fancier design. They aren't rattles or whistles, though, in the feet, and we do also find these traded all the way down into the Maya area. These, in many cases, probably had lids, and occasionally we still do find them with lids. But really fantastic objects and a really good idea of what people look like in color when they were participating in rituals.